When emergency workers are sent to help someone in desperate need, they often try to prepare themselves on the way to the scene, but they never really know what they will find. I'm William Shatner. Tonight, true stories of inspiring courage and people who make a difference on Rescue 911. We begin high in the air above El Toro Marine Base in Southern California. Some of the footage you'll see was taped on April 24th, 1988, as top Navy and Marine Corps pilots showed their stuff at the 38th Annual Navy Relief Benefit Air Show. On the last day of the event, Colonel Jerry Caddick, a jet fighter pilot for 25 years, was to perform. His wife, Vicki, remembers.
Personally, for me, going to an air show is always traumatic because there are mishaps. The possibility of seeing somebody crash is always there. And for whatever reason, that always sits in the back of my mind when I'm at these things.
Jerry would be executing the square immelman, a precision dogfight maneuver he had done often, including this performance 2 days earlier. Normally done at 20,000 feet, at air shows it was done within 500 feet of the ground to give the audience a better view. At speeds of up to 400 miles an hour, there would be no margin of error. That Sunday, Jerry got to the field, suited up, and headed out to his FA-18 Hornet. Still in top physical condition at 45, Colonel Jerry Caddick was one of the most experienced fighter pilots in the Marines, a well-respected group commander, heavily decorated for combat missions in Vietnam. His wife, Vicki, watched from the reviewing stands with her mother and father as Jerry's event was announced.
I remember turning to a stranger that was sitting next to me, just saying, "That's my husband in that plane." And they just thought, "Well, you're kidding me."
The Marine Crash Fire and Rescue crew was immediately launched.
We heard over the radio, "Crash, crash, crash," at which time we started the response down one of the runways.
EMT Sergeant Robert Mergen was on duty at the air show that day.
We were approximately a mile from the crash site. My immediate concerns were the pilot, of course, where we're going to have a body or where we're going to have a victim.
Within 45 seconds of the impact, the first rescue vehicles arrived, but they could do nothing until the fire was under control.
I tell you could hear a pin drop. It was so quiet.
Upon arriving at the scene of the crash, I observed that the cockpit of the aircraft was still closed, which told me that the pilot was still with the aircraft. He had not ejected.
Master Gunnery Sergeant Hugh Davenport was in charge of the Marine Rescue Unit.
When we opened the cockpit, he was slumped over.
Go ahead and get the vitals. Okay. Sir, can you hear me?
Jerry Caddick had slammed into the ground at 75 times the force of gravity.
Apply neutral traction. All right, got it. Rotate him up. I'm going to remove his helmet.
It appeared that his head impacted his control panel and his chest impacted his control stick.
Every minute was critical to his survival.
Our immediate concern was to get the hands free from the ejection handle. Possibly the last thing that went through his mind was to eject from the aircraft. If he came conscious, he may have pulled the ejection handle. He probably had some sort of cervical injury or spinal injury itself. If we utilized the parachute harness to lift him, that would immobilize his spine enough for us to get him onto a backboard.
Okay, watch his head. Set him. Watch his head. Just rotate him. You got his shoulders?
Jerry Kadick hit the ground at such a high rate of speed, I imagine something in the neighborhood of 200 to 300 miles per hour. I really didn't think that we were going to be able to successfully resuscitate him.
Orange County paramedics Rick Van Auken and Thor Swanson took charge of his medical care.
He was a critical trauma. Our patient was breathing about once a second. So we knew that we had some type of respiratory problem. He had massive facial damage, and his airway was obstructed because he was bleeding profusely throughout the mouth and nose area.
You have vital signs for me yet?
Vital signs coming in a minute.
As they tried to stabilize him for transport, Rick made contact with the paramedic base station.
Our patient looks to be about 30 years old, weighs about 190 pounds. We have him extricated, C-collar backboard, mask suit in place.
Hope 1-1, you can go right ahead.
Regarding the lungs, the right side there are no lung sounds present. The left side there are diminished lung sounds in the lower lobe. And he's also got in the extremity the compound fracture of the left ankle break.
Jerry Kadick's condition was extremely critical. His lungs were being crushed by air building up inside his chest. But the paramedics needed permission to proceed with treatment.
If we did not provide this procedure to alleviate this pressure in his chest, he would most certainly have gone into respiratory arrest and followed by cardiac arrest.
Hope 1-1, I copy 10-2. Go ahead with a needle source.
Paramedic 1-1 Alpha, we copy.
We got an order to insert a needle into his chest and relieve all the air that was between his lung and the chest wall. And we did that just as we were taking off.
Within 18 minutes of the crash, Jerry Kadick arrived at Mission Medical Center. Dr. Marcello Barzata was part of the trauma team on duty.
When he arrived at the emergency room, he was critically injured. He had multiple rib fractures, broken bones in his face, a collapsed lung, and he was bleeding on the right side of the chest. He had multiple broken bones in both his lower extremities and multiple broken vertebrae. I think that he probably had a 50-50 chance at that time.
Okay, we've got 24th down there and 25th down toward this way.
Every x-ray that we took was showing a new injury, a new fracture that was initially not evident.
The doctor walked me down the hall, and Jer was laying on a gurney. It was rather awful and quite a shock.
Orthopedic surgeon Bernard Reimer was part of the team that undertook the difficult task of piecing Jerry back together.
We initially were very cautious about his prognosis because of the severe facial and head injuries and spinal injuries. It became obvious probably 2 days down the road that he was most likely going to survive.
At about 2 weeks in intensive care, I started to become conscious, and I was aware of where I was and why I was there. I had no idea of what I had done to myself or how long it might take to repair the damage.
He would spend nearly 3 months in the hospital and emerge with metal plates in his lower back, metal rings to replace crushed eye sockets, metal pins holding smashed ankles together, too weak to stand.
Jer was extremely depressed. People that are chronically depressed are very difficult to live with.
I kind of felt like a failure. I said, what in the world have you done to get to this point, and now look at the trouble you're causing everybody. And one of the things that I think kept me alive was the overwhelming desire to fly jets again. That's all I could think about.
But the Marine Corps determined that Colonel Kadick was no longer medically fit to be a pilot. After 26 years as a Marine, Jerry Kadick retired. His recuperation has been painful and frustratingly slow, but he hopes to make a full recovery.
I have no idea why I survived this accident. Of course, I always felt very embarrassed that I did it. Any Marine fighter pilot hates to make a mistake, and it's taken me a long time to come to grips with that.
Exactly what Jerry did wrong that day has never been officially determined, but aviation expert and airshow pilot Frank Sanders published his own theory that Jerry momentarily lost orientation with the ground. A year after the crash, on the first day they met, the two men became immediate friends.
He said, "Hey, why don't we go flying? And what do you think, Jerry?" And I said, "I don't know, but let's go."
He's not a quitter. He said, "Put me back together and stand me up, and I'm going to continue on in life." And he's just that kind of a guy.
I told Frank, I said, "You know, I have had medical doctors spend hours and hours and hours coming up with ways to rehabilitate me and put me back together again. And I said, here you are, just a jive air show pilot, 24 years on the road. And I said, you have given me the best physical therapy that I could have gotten ever."
He came home, and I can't tell you what it was like to see the look on his face. You know, I didn't know that he had gone for a flight, but there was this spark of life in him again that I really had begun to wonder if I was ever going to see again.
I like challenge, and this was now a challenge, but it was on a much more personal basis, but I was already used to that. So I said, the comeback trail is all uphill. I'm putting on my backpack and going straight ahead.
Next.
My wife's been shot. I've been shot.
Okay, sir. Can you tell me where you are, please?
Oh.
What's your name, sir?
Stewart. Chuck Stewart.